Okay, thank you very much, Gustavo, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present milking machine issues in the context of this webinar. So it's my pleasure to present some of the work that we do on a regular basis. I will start with a little bit of background about quality milk production services in New York State. I'm currently an extension veterinarian with Quality Milk Production Services. We work mainly in New York State, but also international. New York State has close to 20 million population or citizens. The number of dairy farms is decreasing over time. So when I started in 13 years ago, it was 4,000 dairy farms. Now we're looking at close to 3,000 dairy farms. The number of dairy cows is staying consistent at 630,000. Average herd size increases as number of farms decreases, and our cows produce on a yearly basis 16.1 billion pounds. The average somatic cell count is slightly below the national average, so 174,000 cells per cc. At Quality Milk Production Services, we have one central lab that is hosted in the Animal Health Diagnostic Lab under the umbrella of the Cornell University. And we do also have three regional labs. One is in Western New York in Warsaw. One is in Northern New York in Canton. And the third one is in Eastern New York in Cobleskill. Myself, I am located in Central New York, so at the Cornell University. Our mission at Quality Milk Production Services, which is a state-funded program, is to improve the milk quality or help producers produce high-quality milk. And we do that through service, outreach, and research. And some of that research includes also machine or milking machine technologies, and some of that work or the tests that we do during our service efforts I'll present today. So the goal of machine milking is to harvest high quality milk from cows as quickly, gently, and completely as possible. And to achieve this goal, we need a thorough understanding of the interaction between the cow physiology, the milking machine, and for most farms in our region, the interaction with the cow and the milking personnel. I will attempt to explain very briefly what the milking machine does during milking. So this graph shows one teat, two teat walls, an arrow of milk in the teat cistern, the teat canal, and the two red lines represent two blood vessels. And the vacuum forces that we apply during milking does work on the teat to basically unfold the teat canal so we can harvest the milk, but at the same time it also creates stress to the teat and pulls fluid from the cow's body towards the very teat end. We refer to that first alteration, which is an accumulation of fluid within the blood vessels, as congestion. And if that fluid leaves the blood vessels, this is an older belief, then we also observe what we refer to edema. And Carlos already indicated that edema creates a lot of pressure at the teat end. The teat skin is not very flexible, so that pressure translates towards the teat canal. So we'll see that if the congestion sustains, that we then observe a constriction of the cross-sectional area of the teat canal, and then the milk flow decreases through the teat canal, and under some circumstances, in very extreme conditions, it can actually also cease completely. So we do need something that relieves that teat congestion during milking. Otherwise, we won't be able to harvest gentle and quickly, because milk flow will decrease over time within actually a very short period of time. So this is where the pulsator comes into play, and Carlos already showed a nice graph. This image basically illustrates the four phases. The two more important ones are the B phase, which are the open or the milking phase, and the second one is the D phase, which is the closed phase or the massage phase. And what happens during the massage phase, as you can see here with this arrow indicated here in the very middle towards the teat cistern, the collapsing liner actually pushes back that milk into the blood circulation of the cow, relieving that teat congestion at the very teat end. Historically, there has been a disbelief that actually the two-chambered or the double-chambered teat cup mimics the hand milking. So I turned 20 during a milking course during the apprenticeship when I learned that it's actually the other way around, so that we're harvesting during the B phase and we're massaging the teat congestion during the D phase. And that is a common misbelief or misunderstanding. And whether you believe it or not, even the inventors of the double-chambered teat cup first believed that the milk was extracted during the D phase, so during the massage rather than during the B phase. So when we look at a very simple schematic of a milking system, then we do have the vacuum that provides the vacuum pump that provides the vacuum. Here we have a balance tank. From the balance tank feeds the vacuum to the pulsation vacuum line to provide the vacuum that is needed for the pulsation chamber orchestrated by the pulsators. We have a vacuum regulator that is responsible for maintaining a stable level of vacuum. Carlos indicated that the cows don't like the vacuum fluctuations. The sanitary trap here ensures that milk doesn't pass beyond the receiver jar, so it doesn't cause any issues with the rest of the vacuum line. And then the receiver jar basically feeds the milk line with vacuum through the milk hose into the short milk tubes towards the very teat end, which then unfolds the teat canal and harvests the milk. We won't have time to cover all the testings that we do during a parlor evaluation or milking equipment testing. So I selected the three, in my opinion, very important ones and indicate some of the follow-up tests that we do if one of these tests fails. The first one is the average claw vacuum. We do that during the milking, so it is referred to as milking time testing. And then we do a unit fall-off test based on NMC or ISO 5707. This has to be done as a static test. We do it during normal milking observation. I will elaborate on that a little bit later. And the third one will be automated cluster remover settings or the evaluation thereof. I will start with the average claw vacuum and provide some background information for that. So I already showed you that schematic with the teat congestion and the teat edema. Here are some examples how these teat congestion or the short-term changes, as we call them as well, can look like. So on the left, we see discoloration, a swelling at the teat base. The second left image, then firmness at the teat, and we would need to feel that. So, but we can appreciate it here with the white discoloration and then the orifice of the teat opening. The studies that you see here on the bottom, they all investigated and showed a relationship between teat and vacuum, or the vacuum that we apply to the teat, and the degree of teat congestion. I want to highlight the one from Hamann from 1993, who showed a direct relationship between the magnitude of the vacuum that we apply and the magnitude of the teat congestion. And why do we care about those? Well, these short-term changes have been associated, first of all, with increased teat canal colonization. The same researcher, Alfonso Zecconi from Italy, showed also that there's an association with increased infection risks and new intramammary infections. A study from the Benelux states in Europe showed that there is an association between short-term changes and somatic cell count. And Eric Hillerton also indicated that these changes, and if you have them again in front of your imaginary eye, you can easily appreciate that these changes are an animal well-being issue or an animal welfare issue. So when we evaluate the average claw vacuum, we stick to the protocol outlined by the National Mastitis Council, which states that we want to evaluate a representative sample of cows from the entire herd. At Quality Milk Production Services, we try to get at least 10 cows. During a 5 to 20 second interval during the peak milk flow period. I'll talk about the peak milk flow period in a moment, but first I would like to elaborate a little bit more in the equipment. So we can basically use any gauge, vacuum gauge that we have available. At the AHTC, we need to make sure that they are actually calibrated on a regular basis. We access the claw with a 12 to 14 gauge needle. The needle should be at least 2.5 inch long so that the bevel of the needle actually reaches the center of the claw so that we have a clean measurements. The second image indicates the vacuum, the VADIA, which stands for Vacuum Diagnostics. Carlos indicated those. They use those during their study. It measures the teat end vacuum or the vacuum at 4 different spots. First of all, in the short pulsation tube. So this gives us a pulsation vacuum reading, then the short milk tube, the teat end vacuum, and then we have one which is hidden, which is the third channel that measures the mouthpiece chamber vacuum at the same teat cup, and the fourth channel actually measures the mouthpiece chamber vacuum at the left front milking unit. We have different devices. This one is from Delaval, the VPR 200, together with the WPS, and that costs around $15,000. So the equipment is expensive. The work that Christina is doing here is invaluable in our opinion, but it is quite expensive if you purchase that vacuum gauge. And it has to be monitored. So we don't let this hang alone very often, only if we have a very, very safe and dry environment. The advantage of the VADIA device is basically that it creates a pair of free hands. So we position it at the teat cup, as I indicated initially, and then are able to measure the vacuum with the adjunct software. The peak milk flow period, I wanted to show that real quick, is I want to illustrate that with this lactochondrograph. So you see the time on the x-axis, and then here the milk flow on the y-axis. And here on this VADIA graph, we see the teat end vacuum over time, measured in inch mercury. On the peak flow period is basically the time period when the milk flow reaches its maximum. And there's an inverse relationship between vacuum and milk flow, which means that when milk flow is high, vacuum is low, and vice versa. So when the milk flow is low, the vacuum is high. This is the same milking observation, so we can observe milk flow decreasing and then vacuum increasing, and the same is true for the beginning. Milk flow increases and the vacuum decreases. So we focus on this time period here, which is the peak milk flow period. This is the adjunct software program for the VPR 200. We look at a milking observation, cow milking observation, or the vacuum dynamic at the teat end or the cluster of a well-stimulated curve. There is some over milking towards the end. But what we focus is basically this period here where the vacuum is at its lowest value. So we use the cursor and click it in 1 second increments or in larger steps over this period. And then we look at the smallest average, and here it is 10.5 inch mercury, which is relatively low. We can also measure the average claw vacuum with the VADIA. And this is how the VADIA suite software looks like. And this is the cow milking observation of a not so good or not so well stimulated milking observation. I'll walk you through. So here's the teat end vacuum, and you see that during this bimodal phase, the vacuum fluctuations decrease and the vacuum actually goes up. Then the cow lets down its milk. We see more vacuum fluctuation, and then we see quite some significant over milking phase, which is also indicated by the mouthpiece chamber vacuum measured in the right hind and the left front. So bimodal milk flow curves are characterized by an initial increase of milk flow, but then a subsequent decrease. Translating that into the vacuum means that we see an initial decrease, but then a subsequent increase of that vacuum dynamics at the 3 different measuring points. So what the automated feature from Vadia Suite actually does, it identifies the first vacuum drop. So we see the start of the peak flow period is here. The start of the cyclic vacuum fluctuation, was actually the landmark for measuring our average claw vacuum, is located here. So we would measure the vacuum in this area, which would certainly not be the peak flow period, because the peak flow period of this cow milking observation is actually located here. So what we do in those cases, we manually, and this is also stated in the manual that you have to do that, we manually place start of peak flow and the start of the cyclic vacuum fluctuation and manually correct that. So you put your cursor here and then can move that towards left and right. Another thing to keep in mind is that cyclic vacuum fluctuation is always 60 seconds apart from the start of the peak flow period. I added the time gap between those two with T1 and T2, so use the delta function. And we see that 35 seconds is the maximum that I dare doing. Moving this to 60 seconds would have gotten very close to the start of the overmilking phase. So in those cases, I do not adhere to those 60-second gap. At Quality Milk Production Services, and we published that in an NMC proceeding, we actually investigated whether we can do it. So we used the cyclic average vacuum fluctuation in cow milking observations from, I think, 6 farms, 95 milking observations was the total, and then found that, yes, we can do that. We can compare cyclic average vacuum fluctuation calculated by the Vadia suite and compare it to the average claw vacuum evaluated manually from the VPR 100, which is the predecessor of the VPR 200. When is there a problem? Well, the reference range is 9.5 to 12.5 inch mercury. So if the value is above or below, rarely do we see that the value is actually below. We do evaluate it in conjunction with other things that we assess, and namely the teat congestion. So if more than 20% of the cows have one or more teats with a short firm or a short-term change, so firm teat or swelling at the teat base, then we are alarmed and start thinking about changes to the average claw vacuum. And what we do is we contact the equipment dealer. So we want to have all people on board of the milk quality team, and then suggest to decrease the vacuum by 0.3 inch increments. If we do smaller, we may not see much changes or any difference at all. And then we reevaluate after 1 to 2 weeks, give the cows time to adjust, and then evaluate the average claw vacuum and the teat condition as well. What we also want to make sure is that the change is documented. So Nathan here nicely documented that he changed the vacuum. Here's a different option. Here's simply here on the top 13.3 is what the reflex is supposed to read, so that the next parlor manager or lead milker is not thinking coming back from his day off, his or her day off, and changing it back to the old value, thinking that they did something good. So we want to make sure we communicate clear and document clearly. The next thing that I also wanted to elaborate on is the unit fall-off test, which belongs to the diagnostic dry test of the vacuum and airflow. And here the rationale is that historically, there have been several studies that showed a relationship between irregular vacuum fluctuation and the infection risk with Staph aureus, or abrupt loss of milking vacuum associated with infections with Streptococcus agalactiae. What we do is we have the vacuum pump running at normal speeds. All units are connected to the milk line. Pulsators are on. All teat cups are plugged to mimic the milking operation. And then we record, first of all, the operating vacuum. Based on the size of the milking parlor, we either open 1 or 2 units. 1 if there are 32 milking units or less. 2 units if there are more than 32 milking units, or multiple operators. We then start documenting the minimum vacuum during a 5 to 20 second time period. And we use that to calculate the undershoot. And then in another 5 to 20 second period, we evaluate the average vacuum when that unit or the two units are open. In another 5 to 20 second time interval, we then evaluate what we refer to the overshoot by shutting either the one or the two units off all at once, and then document the maximum vacuum after shutting these units off. Normally, it should go back to the normal operating vacuum within a very short period. What is important to remember is that we actually have to let some air in. So if you look at our little schematic, we actually have to turn the milking unit upside down. Otherwise, the short milk tubes will kink and may not let any air in during that unit fall-off test. So that's the right way to hold those units, making sure that the short milk tubes are not kinked. I'll refer again to the VPR 200 software. This is a fall-off test that we did recently. So we evaluate the average vacuum during normal operation. Here, the average vacuum can be read with the average value moving at that yellow highlighted cursor or field towards the right was 13.8. We then want to look into the minimum value to later calculate the undershoot. So that can be with the minimum value of that yellow highlighted area, or if you're finicky like me, I would like to find it with the cursor. So both values match. That is 11.7 in that case. Then we move on for the next period. So that would be section C. Here we use the average value, which was 13.3. And last, we're going to move it over and evaluate at the maximum value. And again, we can move the cursor until we find it, or we can simply read the maximum value. We then go back to our calculation sheet. So the receiver operating vacuum during normal operation was 13.8. We'll subtract for the calculation of the vacuum drop, which is the difference between operating vacuum and the average vacuum during as long as the units are open, which is 0.5. So we're good here. However, when we calculate the undershoot, so the difference between the average vacuum as long as the unit is open and the minimum value, then we recognize that either the regulator or the variable frequency drive or the sensor of the variable frequency drive were not able to respond in an adequate manner. So the difference was 1.6. So the dip was way too far, indicating that the sensor did not react quickly enough. The overshoot was 0.4, so 1412, minus the operating vacuum 13.8, resulting in 0.4 inch mercury. Again, the goal is not more than 0.6 inch mercury, indicating that this test actually failed. And as I indicated, because we were able, or the vacuum system was able to stay within that 0.6 range, our suggestion, immediate suggestion would be that either the VFD or the regulator were not sized correctly in case of a regulator, or the VFD or the sensor are not located right, or something with the VFD or regulator is faulty. When we use the Vadia has actually an application for iPhone and for Samsung phones, so that can be downloaded. That can walk you through very easily. This is from the Vadia suite. That's actually the demonstration file. Currently, to make this work, you have to be very diligent of only recording the fall off. So it cannot be done at the end of a 15 or 30-minute milking, because the automated detection of that fall off test using the Vadia suite will then only choose a random vacuum dip and not the one that you intended. So you would need to manually read that, which is also possible, but you cannot rely on the automated fall off test if you have more than one vacuum fluctuation. Also, and that is true for both systems, the automated evaluation only works under static conditions. I indicated that we're also doing it during normal milking um, conditions. Then we have to basically manually move those cursors and evaluate the minimum value, the average value, and the maximum value, because the automated detection will fail and will get irritated by the normal fluctuations that occur during milking. When is there a problem? Well, if the changes are larger than 0.6 inch mercury, which relates to 2 kilopascal, that's from the NMC and the ISO, we refer to the equipment dealer and then follow up with a diagnostic test of the vacuum and airflow, which we refer to a full NMC. With that, I'm coming to the third item that I would like to present, which is the automated cluster remover. The ACR has its root in Michigan State, or at the Michigan State University. Armstrong and colleagues conducted a series of trials and concluded that the milking machine can be removed earlier by means of the automated takeoff. Significantly decrease the milking duration without adversely affecting milk yield or other health. What we focus on is actually the very end of the milking observation. So again, we have a lactochotograph from a milking observation, and here is what we refer to the over milking phase. So we can avoid, by using ACRs, this excessive over milking where we apply a lot of vacuum to the teat because we harvest only little or no milk. So the operating principle of that uh, okay, yeah, of the ACR is that it uses a milk flow threshold to inform the takeoff event, the milking point controller. Once that threshold is reached, the vacuum is shut off, the vacuum decays, and then the retraction event is initiated. The work from Armstrong and colleagues has been followed up many, many times, including here at Cornell. We did a work together with Paul Werkler in Northern New York, where we tested 2.8 versus 1.8 in a 3x herd. And what we found, and the broad consensus, is that by increasing the takeoff setting in a reasonable amount, we can decrease milking duration. The cows spend less time in low milk flow rate. Teats look better, and we do not harvest less milk. Milking component yields were the same. We do not adversely affect somatic cell count or clinical mastitis risk. As a milk quality consultant, you need to keep 4 definitions in mind. First of all, the minimum milking time, which is the time period until the milk flow meter is allowed to evaluate the milk flow. So this is basically the time that a cow is being milked, no matter what, no matter how low her milk flow is at the beginning of milking. The switch point, or the threshold, is the cluster remover milk flow threshold. So that is our takeoff settings that we refer to and ask the farmers. Then the delay time is the time period that actually the milk flow needs to be below that threshold. Otherwise, it starts counting again, and the unit is not removed until switch point and delay time are fulfilled. And then the vacuum decay time is the time between the vacuum shutoff and the initiation of the retraction event, just to make sure that we are not ripping off cows and the units do not drop on the floor. So we have a nice timing, as I just showed on that video. We assess the functionality of the automated cluster remover with the stripules at Quality Milk Production Services. We strip 30 cows with 4 lactating quarters immediately after unit attachment. We hand strip each quarter for a maximum duration of 15 seconds or until milk flow ceases, whichever is first. And then we want to have at least 150 to 250 cc in 80% of these cows. Another way to get an idea about the takeoff setting is using the Vadia. Carlos indicated that the reference value is 60 seconds of over milking phase. This farm, we went there just last week, is actually a manual detaching milking unit. So it is milking observation of a fairly well stimulated cow. We don't see a dip or an increase, but then we do see a significant amount of over milking. The vacuum fluctuations get tighter, and then we also see that increase in the mouthpiece chamber vacuum of both teats. When we evaluate the over milking time, then the over milking time for that specific milking observation was 3 minutes and 27 seconds. Carlos indicated 60 seconds. To take that into perspective, this is from, sorry, I'm going to get back to my laser. This is from a study that we did in 2021. Takeoff settings were between 2.4 to 3.5 pounds per minute, and we observed an average milking over milking duration between 32 to 68 on 5 dairy farms. A study from Austria found 2.88 and 2.12 minutes in front and hind teats, respectively. They did mention the takeoff settings. Some were also removed manually. And then a study from Portugal has 83 seconds with some conservative takeoff settings ranging between 0.44 pounds and 2 pounds per minute. This is actually the default setting. So when the milking parlor comes, oftentimes it is set to that conservative value here. Well, when is there a problem? I already indicated if less than 80% of cows have that are within that reference range. And again, we do evaluate it in the context of the teat evaluation. When we make changes, we inform the milking technicians. We want to have the equipment dealer on board. We make changes in small increments, 0.1 to 0.2 for the takeoff settings or the threshold value, the delay time in 1 second increments. We want to make sure that the computer speaks and talks with the milking point controller so that the information is transferred to the milking point controller. We want to inform the milking technician to avoid excessive reattaches and manual milking modes. If they're the most conscientious people, actually, milking technicians start reattaching because they think they're doing it right. And then we follow up after 1 to 2 weeks with follow-up strip yields. What we also do from time to time is evaluate the retraction event itself. So we want to make sure that we have a smooth retraction, that vacuum decay time and the retraction event are orchestrated well. In this case, the majority of units were actually dropping on the floor because there was a mismatch. And specifically, they purchased milking liners with air vents, had already drilled the air vents of the claw piece. And so the retraction event was way too slow for the amount of air that was let in. So that needed to be fixed by an adjustment of the retraction event. With that, I'm at the end of the presentation and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.